Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome to our second QMCA virtual breakfast, which today is focused on the interesting and important subject of Construction 4.1. We'll come to that shortly and provide a bit of a background as to what Construction 4.1 is all about. But we have a number of special guest speakers here today that I'd like to introduce first. We have Annabel Crookes, who's Legal and Risk Director, Executive Director and Company Secretary at Laing O'Rourke, as well as being Vice President of the Australian Constructors Association. We have Hossain, State Manager of SMEC for Queensland and Northern Territory. Barbara van Heerden, General Manager Major Projects at SEQ Water. Krishan Tangri, Executive General Manager of Infrastructure Development and Delivery at Brisbane Airport Corporation. And Shane Graham, Executive General Manager, Commercial and Major Projects at HolcIM. So our agenda for today, if I can get it to work, there we go. I'll just give a brief background as to how the virtual breakfast will work. Give you a bit of a briefing and background for those that aren't aware of the term of Construction 4.1, what that is referring to. We'll have views from across the industry from all of those 5 special guests that I introduced just now. And then we'll have a roundtable discussion involving all 5, hopefully informed by questions from you out there. Please feel free to use the chat function and send your questions in for the panel. And then at the end, we'll have our usual wrap up of QMCA industry, Queensland industry news. And again, there'll be an opportunity, if you like, to ask me any questions that you have in respect of what's going on in the industry and what are we doing about the response to COVID-19 and how we're working with government. So the rules of a virtual breakfast, there aren't too many of them. Hopefully you've already got yourself a cup of tea or a coffee, making yourself comfortable. Please keep your microphones on mute. Submit any questions that you have through chat. And with those questions, I think there's an opportunity to ask questions to individuals. Please, if you can keep those questions open to everyone so everyone can see them, including myself, who will be moderating the panel discussion so that I can see them. So Construction 4.1, what is Construction 4.1 all about? Well, we're currently in the 4th industrial revolution, as it's known. As you can see on the screen there, there's the different industrial revolutions. The first one involved about mechanization and power through mass production and electricity, IT and automation. And now we're into the 4th industrial revolution, which is all about the Internet of Things and connectivity. And what does that mean from a construction standpoint? That means building information modeling, geographic information systems, and digital twins. This should have resulted in substantial efficiencies and cost savings for our industry. And whilst there's been some progress in those areas, it's far from what could have been expected. So why is that? Why haven't these things taken off? Well, shortly we'll be hearing from our panelists who will talk about their views on it, and they represent, as you will have gathered, a complete cross-section of industry from asset owners, private sector asset owners, government asset owners, through to contractors, design consultants, and also suppliers. But my view on this is that we have a fundamental problem with the industry being misaligned in terms of what everyone is trying to get out of industry. And we have a problem because of that where contractors are largely focusing on staying alive. Design consultants are very much focused on reducing risk so that Insurance premiums don't go through the roof, and I know, look, there'll be people that will be jumping up and down saying that's not true, and I'm generalizing. Well, perhaps I am generalizing a little bit. And also clients have a tendency to focus on value from just purely through the lens of lowest price rather than overall value. And I think if we can find a way to align everyone's objectives, then there is a real possibility that we will start to get greater uptake of BIM, utilization of BIM, utilization of productivity enhancing tools and processes like lean construction. And what I'm calling that is Construction 4.1. What does Construction 4.1 look like? What does it mean? Well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to throw it over to the panel to give us their views on what Construction 4.1 means. But you can also, if you haven't already done so, if you go to the QMCA website and look at our news section, I wrote a longer piece all about my views on what Construction 4.1 looks like, and feel free to go and have a look at that at some time. So here we come to our panel section, and each one of these special guests is going to talk for 5 to 10 minutes on their views on Construction 4.1, and we're going to start off with Annabel Crookes. So Annabel is Legal and Risk Director and Executive Director and Company Secretary at Laing O'Rourke. She has worked in the construction industry for more than 19 years, and for the last 13 years has held a variety of leadership positions at Laing O'Rourke, and now leads the legal, risk and company secretarial functions. Annabel completed her MBA at the Australian Graduate School of Management in 2011, at the same time as stepping into a broader leadership role as General Manager of Laing O'Rourke's Human Capital and Legal teams, as well as Company Secretary. Annabel is Vice President of the Australian Constructors Association and an industry lead for the Construction Industry Leadership Forum, driving improvements in the development and delivery of major infrastructure projects in Australia. She also sits on various project leadership roles on projects that enables her to influence the day-to-day operations of projects as well as their broad strategy. So, welcome, Annabel. What are your thoughts on Construction 4.1?
Well, good morning, everyone, and thanks for having me. I thought this morning I'd try and take you through some of my thinking, but also the work that the ACA is doing in this space. So in terms of the case for change, I think, look, it's not news to anyone that pre-COVID we were in the midst of an infrastructure boom in many states, and particularly so New South Wales and Victoria, I think over the next 4 years had a $125 billion pipeline. But we're also an industry that's critical for our economic success. So we contribute 9% of our GDP. I think in 2019 we had 1.1 million people employed in our industry, and that's forecast to grow to 1.3 by 2024. And I think that the other key issue for now is that it's the one sector that's continued to operate during COVID, and despite some disruptions, it's now been identified by the federal and state governments as the sort of the key linchpin for economic recovery. So the perfect opportunity to have this conversation, and despite all of that, we know that we're in the midst of a crisis as identified by Construction 4.1. So just look, some further stats that just reiterate the case for change. We're all familiar with the fact that 98% of projects are delivered late and over budget, and I saw some press last week in Queensland about the Metro project and a few other projects in Queensland. We don't have to go very far in our own organisations to see that playing out. Productivity is decreased, margins are razor thin, we're taking on risks we can't manage. Just on a diversity perspective, from a diversity perspective, since 1996 we've increased the participation of women by 1%. So we haven't really made an inroad on that front. Even more worryingly, we've got the highest suicide rate out of all industries, and in light of all of that, the current state's not sustainable. and we really need to do something differently. I think Einstein said the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and again and expecting results. And I think we've shown that that's what we've been doing for the last short while. And if we continue like this, the legacy that we're going to leave for the infrastructure boom is going to be one of failure. So I think there's a real opportunity to create change. And I actually think the COVID crisis has given us an extra push and injection to do something different. So what do I think the change is that the change is required? So first, I think everyone in the industry needs to take responsibility. It's not just clients and it's not just contractors or consultants. So the ACA, for one, we accept that contractors have really contributed to the problem. So our behaviours to date haven't served us well. We've taken short-term views, we've accepted procurement models we can't work under, we've accepted risks we can't manage, and we continue to submit inflated claims expecting, you know, to develop a culture of trust even when we're behaving like that. But we have identified through the ACA a pathway forward, and we're committed to creating some change, but doing it in a commercially sustainable way so that contractors can survive. And so we've done that through working with the Construction Industry Leadership Forum, or the SILF. For those that aren't aware of what the SILF is, it's a joint forum of reps of ACA and the Victorian and New South Wales government and other representatives from Queensland, WA and South Australia. And we are looking in the next few weeks to expand the membership of that organisation so it's truly representative. It was established in 2018, so it's been going for a bit more than 2 years. And it is really the first time that industry and government have worked together to try and improve the collaboration and action around procurement and delivery models. So it's an unprecedented opportunity to work in partnership. And recently, the work we've done over the last 2 years has actually created a really great platform to enable us to deal with some of the crisis issues that arose during COVID, particularly around safety. And now we're really working closely with state and federal governments to look at what projects can be shovel ready and prioritised in the upswing post-COVID. So at a high level, what does the SILF do? So it looks at a three-pronged approach to trying to deal with the crisis in our industry, three separate work streams. So we look at these work streams as a three-legged stool, and you've got to address each one of them to have success. So the first is the commercial work stream, which you'll all be familiar with, and we're targeting commercial procurement and commercial reform, reducing the cost of tendering, creating a fairer risk profile and establishing more collaborative forms of contracts. The second stream is capability and capacity. So it's specifically looking at what are the acute capability and capacity strengths affecting the delivery of our projects. And finally, it's the culture task force. So all of the initiatives we've just talked about would fail if we don't get significant cultural change. And I've read the great work commissioned by the QMCA on this topic, and I think that really shows the need for change. So this stream is being driven by the Construction Industry Culture Task Force, which is looking at developing a culture standard that can be embedded into procurement policies and governments naturally. And you know, one of the things they're pushing for is a 5-day working week instead of a 6-day working week. So from our perspective, if one of these legs of the stool fails, the objectives of the SILF fail. So we need to tweak and manoeuvre each of them for success. Just a quick snapshot of what's been achieved so far. So we've, and there's a lot, and please get in touch with me if you want to know a little bit more detail, but we've published and developed practice notes, and these are intended to provide best practice guidance for agencies and contractors to encourage behavioural change as well as change in the way we procure. An example of this is for the first time, contractors and government agreed that bid cost reimbursement was good practice. A few years ago, that was a dirty word. Now we've seen, particularly in recent months, that there is now a propensity of governments to reimburse bid costs and on a progressive basis. We've also helped looking at the increasingly complex legal agreements on infrastructure projects, and we've seen governments move towards splitting projects up into different packages, taking out early works packages where it might be utilities risk to try and reduce the interface problems and other issues. And we've also seen an increase in collaborative forms of contracts coming to market. So ECIs in the health space, incentivised target costs, alliances are no longer a dirty word in some states. And we've also seen the NEC contracts be issued by Sydney Water in New South Wales. I think another key development was the New South Wales government publicly issuing their 10-point commitment plan. You know, this was pretty amazing stuff when it actually recognises in its preamble that value for money does not mean obtaining the lowest price. And it expressly says that they want to adopt a broader view and look for longer term issues like quality, innovation and cost effectiveness. So there's still a long way to go, but I think a public commitment, I certainly use it in negotiating bids. It's a good conversation starter. So there's been quite a lot of progress, still a lot to do. Just to mention a couple of areas we're focusing on in the year to come, and there are many. The first one is we've agreed with government that we will institute early risk workshop conversations about business cases, procurement models and the allocation of risk on projects. So the aim of this initiative is to have the government, so the client and all potential contractors in a room together, talking about the procurement model and then the key risks on a project progressively through a bid. So the idea is to encourage real conversation about risks and some adaptation throughout the procurement phase, so that we're not in a situation where the person that ultimately wins is the person that is prepared to accept a risk that others aren't. We're also exploring, as I said before, just what projects are shovel ready or what can be accelerated and what innovative procurement models might support those projects as we look to come out of COVID. So from my perspective, why is this important? The cost of doing nothing is great. I think if we continue like we are, we'll end up where the UK was with organisations like Trillium going bust. And I think although much of the impact of COVID is unknown, it presents an opportunity to try and do new things differently. We've seen incredible collaboration during this crisis, even with unions. So we should use this as a platform to really accelerating some of this change. So I think just in closing, the ACA wholeheartedly supports Construction 4.1, and really it's an invitation from me to all of you to try and get involved in and support SILF, and we're looking to try and bring organisations like QMCA in to hear all of your smarts as well and bring you along for the journey.
Excellent. Thanks, thanks Annabel for that.
Pleasure.
I would now like to introduce Sami Hossain. Sami is State Manager of SMEC for Queensland and Northern Territory, leading its business in the region. Starting with SMEC as a graduate, over the last 15 years, he has worked in the international business in South Asia and Middle East, and more recently in the ANZ division. Sami has worked in all aspects of consulting engineering, from business development to project delivery, and from operations management to board governance. He has undertaken business pursuits, opportunity conversation, contract negotiations, and delivering outcome for large infrastructure projects. Sami is passionate about inclusion and diversity and believes that an organization's sustainability is dependent on its ability to foster diverse cultures and to respect the value everyone can bring. He's also a voracious reader and believes that there is nothing like a good book that's hard to put down, and Good to Great by Jim Collins underpins his philosophy of leadership and personal effectiveness. So welcome, Sami. Is Construction 4.1 an example of good to great or pretty awful to not so bad?
We are starting well. Let's just put it this way. Do you hear me?
Yep, all good.
Yeah, wonderful. All right, can you see my screen, John?
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. Thanks, John. Thanks for having me. It's fantastic. I mean, it's fantastic to be in QMCA breakfasts, and it's great to be interacting with this group of people. So I suppose I'd probably give a little bit of a background of where what it came about. So a couple of weeks back, I was having this conversation with John, and John said that, you know what, I've got this brilliant idea of having a QMCA breakfast, talking about QMCA 4.1 and how can we use the COVID-19 situation as a launch pad to bring about some good and much needed changes. And how about you come and talk about this stuff and what that means for design consultants. And we're about 20 seconds into the conversation, and I had 200 thoughts in my mind, and I knew for a fact that I could go on for an hour, which is when John threw his carball and said that, by the way, I've got 10 minutes. So I sort of, took a backseat and thought about that. How am I supposed to, I guess, dilute that, 1 hour conversation into a 5 to 10 minute conversation? So I went back and possibly referred back to one of the books that I read, and then it talked about this thing called cornerstone activities. And cornerstone activities is typically the ones that you undertake, and that would then set other activities in motion, like a domino effect, but good one in that. So I sort of then, I guess, decluttered the activities and the thoughts that I had in my mind into 3 different cornerstone activities, which in my mind, if we were to approach, would then set further ongoing activities in motion, and hopefully would bring about the changes that we are looking for. Probably the other way to look about it is, these activities, when started, everything else will then be taken care of itself. So, and those are the 3 things that I want to talk about today. Those are, I mean, the 3 cornerstone activities probably somewhat similar to what Annabel was saying in her presentation, but I guess my first cornerstone would be the pipeline that we work with. And what I mean by that is that we need a sustainable pipeline, we need volume in the pipeline, and we need visibility in that pipeline. And by sustainability, I simply mean that there should not be too much of a peak or too much of a trough in the pipeline, so that the pipeline is sustainable, and that the local industry grows around that pipeline, and then most of the demand of the activities within that pipeline can be met locally. Sure, there will be once in a generation projects like Cross River Rail, for which all the skills will not be resident in the state market, for which we will have to import some skills. But we should be in a position in which most of our skills are available in the market, and most of the available skills are being utilized sustainably in the market. The next one is about volume. The volume is really more about, not every construction project that is conceived would get funding or funding in time. And not every design that gets done gets to the construction, and not every planning that gets undertaken gets to the design stage. So which basically means that we need to have a bigger pool of planning and design projects, which will then mean a little smaller pool of design projects, which would then mean a little smaller pool of construction projects. But it's very, very important that we have all those 3 things aligned and sustainably done throughout the timeline, so that we continue having that sustainable pipeline. And the last bit is really about visibility, which is it's great to have this pipeline of projects and the thinking and the thought process, but it's also equally important that we, as the supply chain, in the supply chain, know about that and know about what's coming, know about what's important for the clients of the government, so that we can plan and invest around that. So that's what I call, in terms of what pipeline cornerstone 1 looks like. And why I say that's important is because, one, that it's economic outreach. When we have got a sustainable pipeline, that means the money is getting injected into the supply chain in a consistent way, which means the money is going back into the economy in a consistent way. So by sustaining the pipeline, we are actually sustaining the economy in itself. And then there is this client benefit piece, which is about, when we have got a sustainable pipeline, we have got local industry built up, and we have got, the clients have got the benefit of getting projects delivered by local people whom they can trust and they know, as opposed to relying on someone from out of the state or out of the country. Then there is this investor confidence piece, which is us, because when we know the pipeline and when we have confidence on the pipeline, we have the ability to go on and invest with greater confidence and go on and say that, okay, we will invest 50 more people without having to worry about, okay, can we keep them busy in 2 years' time or not? Which then improves the confidence of the new entrants into the industry. So that's the university graduates, there's new students who aspires taking up the engineering career, and they would then look at the industry and then think that, okay, that's a good industry, it's a sustainable industry, there is good job prospect, I don't have to travel too much unless that's something that I want to do by choice. So that's then improves the pipeline piece as well. And then of course there's this piece about reducing interstate movement, which means that when there is a peak, a lot of skills get drawn into the state, and then they get capacity is built around those people, and if we fall off the cliff and all the skill that have been developed and the state has invested on then gets dispersed and someone else gets the benefit out of it. So what I'm trying to say here is probably that by just looking at pipeline, we can improve the health of our industry quite significantly. Which then brings me to the second cornerstone, which I'm calling collaboration, which is similar to what Annabel was saying. I suppose what I'm suggesting in that is improved two-way communication, and that's my way of saying that we expect the clients to hear what we are saying, and equally we should be listening to what our clients have to say. And that might mean that we would have some advocacy piece that the clients we would be expecting the clients to give importance to, and equally if the clients wants something changed in our industry, we make those changes. Then there is this much talked about topic of risk allocation. I mean, obviously we should look at risk allocation in a different light than we are now. I mean, risk should definitely sit with the party that is best suited to manage that risk, because we sometimes have this utopian idea that all the risk can actually be transferred and the project will not suffer. That cannot be correct, because at the very least the project health will suffer, because the person who's not best placed to manage that risk is taking on a risk and will not do a good job about it. And then there is this piece about, even if I can manage that risk, the cost of managing that risk is going to be so great that the value of the project, the value of the risk management process gets compromised, and therefore it goes back to the taxpayers, and their money can be used in better ways. Then there is this piece about standardized contracts. We got to do more around the standardized contracts, because every time we get into a new style of contract or new set of contracts, it just means that the industry will have to unlearn the previous contract and relearn a new contract, and it takes time and energy and effort, and it's not efficient. As opposed to if we had one set of standardized contracts, or some similar suite of standardized contracts, we could then go on and build our capacity around that, and then we will be able to almost operate in an autopilot mode and be able to do a good job about it. And then there is this piece around, on collaboration, the faster bidding. I think we should really look at more and more single source or streamlined bidding activities, so that we can go on and, hit the ground running fast and quickly and more efficiently. And especially important in a COVID-19 situation when we really want to get going as soon as we possibly can. And then this other piece around requiring innovation. And I think because of that tension of profitability and tension of commercial pressure, I think the innovation somehow takes a backseat. I would love to be in a position in which innovation actually becomes a requirement as opposed to an add-on or a value add by the consultants or by the contractor. innovation will then be evaluated as part of the evaluation criteria of a bid, whether it's a design bid or a construction bid. And then it will be looked at as a value for money approach, as opposed to, okay, who's the cheapest price of the lot. And why have I chosen collaboration as a second cornerstone is, one, it's obvious that we should look at best value project outcome, regardless of the cost, and look at the risks in a way that that's best for the project, as opposed to best for the contractor or best for the client or best for the designer. It's more about, okay, what is the best allocation of the risk given the circumstances, given the scope. Hopefully that would mean that if we can adopt that collaboration piece, we would be more outcome focused and less process focused. I mean, the contracts is there for fallback approach to see how things needs to be done and all, but we should never lose sight of the fact that a project is like building something, and ultimately we need to build it and build it well, and the outcome is far more important than how and in what approach we are trying to build it. And of course, there is this outcome of reduced claim and associated cost in the event then there is a disagreement between the parties within a contract. So by improving collaboration, we are able to achieve all of that. And the relevance in a COVID-19 situation of that probably is that there's a faster turnaround of projects, and we can come in and deliver the project and go off, and therefore can supercharge the economic recovery of the state and the country as a whole. Which brings me to the final cornerstone in my mind, which is people. Now, that's not entirely related to COVID-19, I suppose. It's probably a much bigger picture. And the reason I wanted to touch on the people is really because, with the right people around us, we can pretty much solve everything. And Annabel was talking about a quote, and I remembered something like, a machine, which is really good. A machine can do work for 10 people. But no machine can work as much as one extraordinary people. So that's how important people are. And I'd really like our industry to do more around the people piece and, the people who gets the job done. And by that, I mean, I need to have a better pipeline of new entrants and new graduates and new people into the industry from the universities and from the schools and the likes of it. The health, mental health and physical health, Annabel touched on that again, and diversity of it, especially on the back of the fact that, we are in an influx of immigrants. So we got to do better in terms of, pulling everyone together in a diversity context. And then of course, there is this reconciliation with the traditional owners of the land also there. And then there is this training piece about committing a certain percentage of our earning should really go for training, regardless of which part, where in our industry we are, which part of our work is getting delivered. Every one of us should be delivering, reinvesting a part of our earning into training activities. That way, what that means is that I don't have to worry about training someone and then losing that person, because I would know that one of my peers and one of my competitors are doing the same thing, and even if this person leaves, I will get someone else who will be equally trained, and by that we will be pulling everyone together along the journey and will be upskilling the entire industry. And of course, the cost base will be stabilized as well. And equally, which is the research and development piece, I think we got to do more on the research and development. And I would love to be in a position where everyone is committing a certain percentage of their earning into the R&D piece as well, which will then improve, I guess, the attractiveness of our industry, why people and the high achievers would want to come in and work in our industry, because it's just exciting, because we do great things, good things, and new things. And that's how we would attract great people. And why we do that? Because if we have right people, and we have the right enablers like the training and development and right condition and right hygiene practices and the likes of it, we would have right outcome, which is what we're trying to achieve. That's all from me. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much, Sami. Yeah, some good insights there. I would now like to welcome Shane Graham. Shane is currently the Executive General Manager, Commercial and Major Projects at Holcim, Australia and New Zealand. Shane has spent 38 years in the construction materials and major infrastructure project sectors. In that time, he's worked for a number of national and multinational organizations. He's been involved with major infrastructure projects across the energy, civil infrastructure and building sectors. And Shane has been a long-time supporter of more collaborative and less combative commercial frameworks for the construction industry. So welcome, Shane. How do major suppliers see the state of the construction industry as it is now?
Thanks, John. At risk of repeating some of that's already been presented, what I thought I'd do is probably add a little bit. For those of you who've heard me speak before, but who have dealt with me over 38 years, you know that I am pretty passionate about the frailty of how our industry establishes commercial frameworks. But I'll start by saying this. John, or as I prefer to call him, Jonathan. Apparently, there's only he and myself and his mother that use that term. But anyway, nonetheless, Jonathan asked me to give some thoughts around the next version of what the construction industry could look like. And having seen most of the last few versions, we're seeing COVID-19 as a time to pause and reflect because we've had to. We're sort of all stuck at home predominantly. We're hearing that industry has effectively petitioned successfully various levels of government to bring forward shovel-ready projects. In the short term, I think that creates fantastic opportunity for the industry in terms of potential forward pipeline, and also potentially a timely, moment to reflect on whether we can implement change as we need to get these expedited projects into the market. But the other reason I think we need to desperately change actually is the medium term. So as someone who's heading, towards a gentler lifestyle at some point in the next 10 years, I'm genuinely concerned about the prospects of our industry around a number of issues. The immediate post-COVID will have plenty of opportunity for major constructors. There's no question about that. My concern in Australia particularly is, what does construction look like, 3 to 5 years from now, when, the federal government and state governments invariably are loaded with debt, and we have to have a better way to identify investment opportunities in major infrastructure projects. So part of what I'll talk about is pretty obvious because it's the same stuff I've been talking about for the last few years. But actually, I think if anyone's thinking that this is about creating an immediate platform for the post-COVID-19 opportunities, I think you're wrong. I think you're underselling the potential difference that we're going to see on our commercial landscapes, 3, 5, 10, 15 years from now, as most governments, particularly around the world, Western world, will be loaded with debt. So we're going to have to identify different ways to get projects into the market and constructed to have a sustainable industry. So I'll start by, I've tried to frame my thoughts around a few questions Jonathan posed for us. What are the impediments to driving these changes? What culture has the industry come from? How do we align key stakeholders? So I'll talk predominantly about that, and I will try to be reasonably prompt and certainly open to hard questions later. The fundamental impediment that we're facing, I believe, is our past. And you don't have to go forward dragging your past with you, but your past performance generally is the best pointer of your future performance. Unless something changes, our past has the risk of becoming our future. Our past is littered with adversarial contractual frameworks. We had a brief flirtation as an industry with alliance contracting and sub-alliances within that. Suppliers who are able to participate based on critical path and supply chain security around some of those sub-alliances. There were some exceptional outcomes generated in that, but apparently certain members of Treasury departments, A, didn't understand it, and B, didn't like it. So we then get swung immediately back into a deep, dark cycle of hard-edged procurement. The other thing that's occurred through this adversarial sort of contractual framework that we've been living with is risk allocation invariably ends up cascaded down from the principal. It gets shifted over to the principal contractor. It then gets shoved down to the subcontractors and suppliers. And to Sammy's point earlier, you then have the vast majority of the risk being back to back, knock for knock, all the way down the hill until there's some poor bastard who's got his house on the line, dealing with really complex risk allocation, A, that they don't understand, and B, that are completely inappropriate for the activity that that individual is trying to complete on that project. You know, we get a bit of a reputation as Wholesome for being sometimes hard to deal with. We're actually not. We're just a little bit insistent about how risk gets allocated to us. We're a supplier. We deliver products to site and then we leave. Principal risk sits with principal contractors, not with plumbers and electricians. Appropriate risk sits with them. What I would also say is, fundamentally, I actually, you know, in terms of answering the question of how do we align stakeholders, I actually think stakeholders start from a point of alignment. They actually start from a point of alignment. An asset owner wants something built. A constructor wants to build something. Invariably, both parties are looking for the same outcome. They're both looking for value for money. They're both looking for a project to be on time, and they're both looking for the project to be on budget. So they actually start reasonably aligned. Now, what then happens is a commercial framework gets overarched against that shared alignment, and that's when things start to go awry. From my experience, the allocation of that risk ends up a win-lose scenario, literally clause by clause. You know, it wouldn't be unfair of me to out a particular road authority that is not Queensland Main Roads, but it would be one of the other states. They would be the main perpetrator of completely inappropriate risk allocation, which then ends up in a principal contract, then ends up cascading down. And it got to the point where, by example, on a particular national highway upgrade project, Wholesome chose not to participate because there were two onerous conditions in the contract that were utterly unacceptable. So when you've got 23% of Australia's supply chain for construction materials saying we cannot and will not participate around this project because there's two contractual clauses that are completely unreasonable, and that's been put forward by a state government body, you know the industry is in deep, deep difficulty. One of the hurdles in trying to keep the parties aligned through the contractual process is the tendering process is broken, in my view. I can say things that are pretty hard and direct because I don't have 30 years in front of me in this industry. So I'm not saying them as I leave. I've been saying these for 10 years. The tendering process is broken. It's onerous. It's often ill-informed. It requires parties to take best estimates and then they get a hard contract thrown around that. It's often premised on inadequate technical information, inadequate time at times. The process then leads to a cascaded procurement process, which doesn't allow adequate timeframes, isn't founded on genuine collaboration for doing things better, faster, more cost effectively. And it certainly doesn't allow for innovation. Some of you have heard me talk previously about, and I can give you a list of 30 projects, but I'll give you one in particular. And again, it's outside of Queensland, so I'm not at risk of offending anyone here. I won't reveal the project. I will say it was north of 4 billion. We provided an opportunity to put an alternative pavement design to all tenderers prior to the project being awarded. That was denied. One party won the job. We then went back to that same party, offered an alternative pavement design. No groundbreaking innovation, stuff that's been done elsewhere. In fact, stuff that's been done in that particular state with that particular road authority and also that particular asset owner. It would have saved $60 million and probably saved them 9 months and given the pavement outcomes directly to the principal much more in their control and therefore probably de-risk the critical path. Unfortunately, by then the project was out of time. They'd already started an adversarial process with their client. It had already become problematic. So the answer was, we love the idea. It's the best technical solution we've seen for many, many years, but we cannot afford the time. And by the way, the client will want every dollar of value back to them. So the process is broken. The other thing that innovation and collaboration really requires as a foundation is a degree of trust. So I go back to our culture of this industry. Trust forms out of relationship, but it also forms over time. Invariably, this industry is always out of time. Everything's urgent, and that becomes incredibly problematic. In terms of, you know, who should lead, if you can accept my proposition that the industry is close to broken in terms of creating value, creating platforms for collaboration, and actually implementing innovation. Innovation is easy to say. It's actually reasonably easy to do, but it's very hard in this country to get accepted by asset owners because they simply want to shift all the risk to external parties. So, you know, and you end up in things like, and I know we've got some designers on this, but I will use the soapbox while I've got it. Specifies engineering consultant engineering specifying 300-year design life on concrete in a contract is ludicrous. I could go on and on and on about it. LafargeHolcim is the largest construction materials company on the planet. This is not an advertisement, it's just a statement. We have 300 PhDs working for us in Lyon in France. So you could probably safely assume that Holcim in Australia, for instance, knows more about concrete than most people in Australia. Invariably, we're not able to get those innovative opportunities up on major projects because timelines and procurement processes don't allow it. So I'm going to try to wrap up. The culture currently is broken. The tender process is close to broken, and the procurement process is utterly broken. So if there's procurement managers on the call, I'd welcome a phone call later and we can debate why your procurement process is perfect, whole and complete and delivering value for everyone. What I thought I'd do in terms of a roadmap for potential success for this industry to go forward for another 30, 40, 50, 100 years into the future, there's actually a bit of a roadmap being identified elsewhere. So the New South Wales government put out a 10-point plan, and I'm going to briefly touch on the 7 that I think are the most pertinent. You have to establish and be committed to a genuinely collaborative procurement process. And that's easy to say, harder to do. You have to take a partnering approach to risk allocation so that you end up with fair and reasonable risk distribution between the asset owner, whether that's public or private sector, and the parties who are building or supplying it. Please, at some point, before Jonathan retires, can we please see some standardised contracts? Every project, every asset owner, I think, gets advised by various industry advisory services to view their project and themselves as special. And therefore they need unique contractual conditions. I think that's largely bullshit. We need to have transparency around pipelines. Project pipelines just cannot swing, ebb and flow, peaks and troughs. One of the points that I hope someone talks about is how do you create a sustainable industry from a people perspective? I worked with a very, very strategic and extremely competent HR practitioner a little while ago, and she described our industry, well, actually Holcim, as a proxy for the industry, as mostly male, mostly pale, and mostly stale. So one of the challenges in not maintaining a pipeline that is sustainable over time and transparent, industry can't plan. We can't develop our young talent and then retain it. We gear up and then we gear down because of the lack of work. So we've got to have a sustainable pipeline. Only 2 more to go. Measure and reward performance and innovation. Give us an opportunity as an industry, as a supply chain industry, to demonstrate value for money as a price of entry. We understand we have to be commercially viable, but give us an opportunity to demonstrate innovation. Innovation in terms of materials technology, innovation in terms of environmental credentials. You know, the number of times we've talked on major projects about environmental credentials for our product range, and we'll be dealing with a junior project engineer, with no disrespect to the junior project engineers who might be on the call, who then tells us flatly, not interested in environmental outcomes, just give me the price. That we should all be ashamed of that kind of behaviour. We've got to make this industry attractive to the young people. I often walk into a meeting or into a room and I ask people, who in this room started in this industry under 25? And most hands will go up. And then I'll ask another question, who in this room is under 25? And there's none. So we've got to find a way to have this become an attractive, vibrant and sustainable industry over time. That's pretty much as I see it. I'm incredibly encouraged by the efforts of the QMCA. And I would say, I think you lead this agenda nationally. My role is national, and I deal with most industry associations. But I'm particularly pleased by the really proactive and go after it attitude of the Queensland Major Contractors Association. And Jonathan, that's coincided with your time there. So well done, mate.
Thanks, Shane. I knew I could rely on you to tell it how it is, with no fluffing around, and some really excellent points there. So we've heard now from all of the supply side, I suppose. I think it's time to now hear from the client and asset owner side. So I'd now like to welcome Krishan Tangri. Krishan is an industry recognised executive leader with more than 25 years experience in infrastructure, facilities and construction management, with well-recognised private and public organisations. In 2015, he was a finalist for CEO Magazine's Construction Executive of the Year. Krishan has previously held various senior management positions in both facilities and construction management with Sydney Airport Corporation and Brisbane City Council, managing multi-billion-dollar asset portfolios, and delivered an 800 million suite of complex and high-profile projects very successfully. Since 2010, Krishan has provided strategic foresight to Brisbane Airport Corporation as Executive General Manager of Infrastructure Development and Delivery, overseeing multi-billion-dollar asset infrastructure and construction portfolios. Having led and embedded a cultural shift, Krishan now leads a commercially orientated, highly qualified and efficient business unit, which is on track to deliver the $1.3 billion new parallel runway project on time and under budget. Krishan is a graduate of the Australian Institute of Company Directors and holds an MBA with a finance major from Deakin University. A qualified civil engineer, Krishan also holds a master's in construction management from University of New South Wales. So welcome, Krishan, and congratulations on the successful completion of the new runway. Given successful projects are not so common these days, I'd be very interested to hear your thoughts on what the secrets of success were.
Thanks, John. I must say that I was very impressed with the previous speakers, Annabel, Shane and Sammy, and who actually shared what is wrong in the construction industry. So I would like to share probably my experience or BAC's experience in delivering infrastructure projects, and I will touch on the runway specifically as well. But as I see it, is that you have mentioned 3 streams in Construction 4.1. One was around the technology, using them, second, adversarial contracts, and thirdly, industry culture. And I'll probably share, as I mentioned before, just our perspective on all those 3 streams. So first, moving on to the technology side, I would just reflect on digitalization of global engineering and construction industry. In 2017, globally, engineering and construction industry was $10 trillion in value, or 6% of the global GDP. But unlike, unfortunately, other industries, engineering and construction has been very slow to adopt new technologies and has never undergone a major transformation. And as you mentioned before, the productivity has been very stagnant over the last 15 years. And according to Boston Consulting Group, the full-scale digitalization in construction will lead to annual global cost savings of 17% in the engineering and construction phases and 13% in the operational phases within the next 10 years. And that's a 2017 report. We basically at Brisbane Airport have really adopted digital engineering in a big way, and it's probably more than just BIM. It's obviously GIS, virtual reality, audio, augmented reality, and things like that. But the key message I want to emphasize is that digital engineering is a collaboration tool, and it's an enabler for driving efficiency in the whole of asset lifecycle. And the Brisbane Airport is, as you know, is an asset owner, and like any asset owner, operator, and maintainer have a strong interest in the whole of asset life approach, and we use digital engineering in the whole of the asset life cycle. Despite the COVID-19, Brisbane Airport will double impact PAX numbers by 2040, and that means we have a strong interest in using digital engineering for driving efficiency through in both CapEx as well as an operating expenditure. We have used digital engineering, digital engineering in construction and operations. In construction, class detection, service planning, as well as site planning and site coordination. And in operations, we have also used a specific example is that we have built a digital twin of the airfield where we can train the airport operation officers to manage the runway in operation once it's open on July 12th. The big question is, has the BIM actually, or has the digital engineering driven value for Brisbane Airport? And the answer is yes. We have developed an in-house BIM value assessment tool for the first time, and we measured the performance of predefined KPIs on the project and was used on a terminal expansion project with a major contractor. And we monitored not only cost and time, we monitored energy, supply chain, performance, safety, quality, and risk. Admittedly, it's still a bit of a subjective tool, but we measured overall value add of about 12.4% for the planning and construction phase over a similar non-BIM project. And that was achieved through better design coordination and collaboration, site planning in a virtual environment, clash detection in design phase, less errors and omissions in design documentation, less rework on site, off-site fabrication of steel trusses, and better hazard identification and safety into the design processes. So very happy with using the digital engineering, and our now ambition is to grow the BIM of digital engineering into 7D model over time, and that means including sustainability and facilities and asset management in the BIM tools, a truly 7D model there. So the other two topics which I want to just briefly mention is whatever experience or whatever perspective is around adversarial contracts and culture, but I believe they're to some extent related. In the last 10 years, Brisbane Airport has delivered $3.5 billion worth of assets, and we have not had one single legal dispute. We have delivered car parks, terminal expansions, and now the runway. The projects haven't, the project didn't overrun in terms of budget, generally finished on time. Yes, we had contractual dispute, but they were amicably resolved. We have adversarial contracts, like any, there's nothing special about those contracts, but still we have been able to achieve, to avoid the legal disputes. So how did we achieve it? So we are an informed client. So I think I must say that one thing which is coming loud and clear from everyone is that you need to have capacity and capability in the business itself. And that's what we have invested heavily on it. And what we have done also is when we have selected our partners, we have specifically looked at that, I would say, that particular position, that particular trait in our partners, that how's their capability and capacity like when we are selecting our partners. we have taken time to plan and design, and again, it was to some extent it confirmed that the time you're taking to plan in designing before we embark on a large project is well worth the effort, and that avoids a lot of problems later on. We selected the right contract models and incentives with that. The selection of the contractor was based on value, not just the cost, the capability of the company and people and methodology. And during the procurement there was an active management with the contractor and engagement with the contractor to find the right outcome for the project. We did significant or comprehensive internal and external peer reviews of the design to drive value with our consultants and the contractors. But our effort didn't just finish there. We actually, after the awarding the contract, we formed the project leadership teams at senior level as well as executive levels who met regularly. We drew up a leadership charter, which was based on one team who worked for the best interest of the project. There were frequent leadership surveys. The unhealthy behaviors were called out, and the celebration of the milestones was another important role played in the post award of the contracts as well. So we basically made sure that we walked the talk. There was PCGs which were chaired by external, well-reputed external personnel. We had dispute avoidance board, but I'm glad to say we didn't have to use one. The dispute avoidance board was there all the time to make sure that things don't go and get out of hand. But we were able to resolve all our problems within either the senior leadership team of the project or the executive leadership team there. In terms of NPR, I'm glad to say it's finished on time, under budget. The final out-turn cost was $1.1 billion. It was a construct only, not many projects, and we've seen examples. The other airports are looking at more DNC type approach, but we believe that considering the intimate operational aspects of this project as well as the geotechnical risk, we are best positioned to manage those risks. So we fully documented the design and then let out the contract. It is an 8-year-old project, and the record speaks for itself. We had excellent safety and environmental record. The stakeholder engagement model was excellent. We had a good relationship with the government. The community engagement was excellent. Dredging was a dirty word when we did the dredging in 2013-14, but actually we had a positive media interest. We had no commercial disputes. In fact, the final claim on this project was settled 5 months before the PC date. And it happened because, in my view, if you ask me honestly, what is the 2 or 3 main reasons? One, the number one, I'll still have to say the right people for the job, right partner for the job, and right people in those partners. The second would be the project-related culture. All companies will have commercial interest, and they will not always align. But what we can align is align interest on the project. So one project, we always had the best for the project mantra on the projects, and made sure that all parties, to the extent possible, live and breathe that culture of one project team. And yes, from time to time, commercial interest will come into play, but we were able to amicably resolve that for the best interest of the project. So that's our experience has been over the last 10 years, and especially on the NPR. That's all from me.
That's excellent. Thanks very much, Krishan. I'd now like to welcome Barbara van Heerden. Barbara is currently leading the planning and delivery of major projects for SEQ Water, having taken on the role as General Manager of Major Projects at SEQ Water in November 2019. Barbara is responsible for establishing and managing the portfolio of major capital water infrastructure projects, which includes any projects over $40 million and a combined portfolio value currently of over $1 billion. Prior to her current role in SEQ Water, Barbara held the role of Regional Director for the Department of Transport and Main Roads. She was responsible for leading the strategic direction of the region, managing a team of over 300 people and delivering a portfolio of works of $3.9 billion. Barbara spent the first half of her career working in various private sector and local government roles in South Africa and Namibia, followed by senior leadership roles in the United States of America and the United Kingdom before relocating to Australia 12 years ago. Barbara's career has predominantly centered on the engineering industry, in particular within construction and engineering of infrastructure, major land development and redevelopment, environmental projects. Barbara has a master's degree in civil engineering and is a chartered professional engineer in civil and executive management, and also a graduate of the Australian Institute of Company Directors. Throughout her career, Barbara has had considerable exposure to international markets, global diversity, mergers and acquisitions, leading change, and working with high-performance senior executive teams. So welcome, Barbara. SEQ Water has a large pipeline of work coming up, if you pardon the pun. How do you think Construction 4.1 could work for you?
Hi, Jonathan, thanks for introduction, but also thanks for putting me last. There's only one thing that's worse than speaking last on a panel, and that is speaking after a politician or a lawyer. But, you know, Krishan did a very good job, so it's a hard act to follow. So I'll try my best. As you mentioned, the major project group for SEQ Water has been recently established. I've been in the role for about 6 months, and it started just before I joined. So we definitely on a journey, and we recognize that the construction industry had already taken some beating, cost pressures, labor shortages, and a lot of sort of challenges that's sort of prompting heavy losses. So we recognize that. And we also recognize that we've been criticized in the past that we are difficult to do business with. So we would like to sort of recognize that, and also making sure that we understand what we can do as an organization to reboot, the construction industry, specifically, and after this COVID-19. So to try and get an understanding of that is we're also doing an investigation with BDO to have a look at what has happened previously after economic stimulus packages and in terms of global financial crisis, where a lot of economic stimulus was thrown to the construction industry, what that impact is. And I think it sort of ties into what Shane said. It's like, what about the 5 and the 10 years from now, where governments will carry huge levels of debt? So in all of that, so I'm going to share with you our roadmap. It's a 10-point roadmap, nothing aligned with New South Wales. It's just what SEQ Water recognizes what we need to do to make sure that we have a good and transparent pipeline of work so that we can engage with the industry. So I'll start off by saying it's slightly more constrained when you work with public money. There's a lot of probity issues. There's a lot of political media scrutiny, and so sometimes the rest of the industry don't understand some of the drivers. But once you've actually worked on the client side in the government or own corporation or in government, you really understand that there's sometimes not everything is under your control. So for me, I'll start off by saying our number one the key point on our roadmap is trust. And if we spoke about culture and impediment. Now I believe that trust and the lack thereof, has actually driven a lot of the behaviors and poor behaviors in the past, and unless we can actually establish and reconnect with that trust, it's not going to work. So for me, trust. So I don't know if anybody on the call can actually remember, doing a deal or doing a contract on a handshake, so that was in the good old days. And I know not everything in the good old days is good, but that is really something quite important, so we need to try and go back to a period where a contract on a handshake is almost good enough. And I think that is the big reset that we need to do, so for me, that is the first step. And if you really think about it, the behaviors and the culture, what is the first person that gets put on a contracting team? It's the claims manager and the claims teams, So if that is the basis that we start from, what is the chance of success? And I think that is quite important for me. So the second one is, we committed to transparency. So what do I mean by transparency? And once again, picking up on some of the previous speakers as well, is that we need to provide the industry, whether it is the professional services, the contractors or subcontractors, doesn't matter who, we need to provide a proper pipeline of projects. Now that is one of the first jobs that we are doing as part of our program, is we're looking at what is in our pipeline for the next, say, 15 to 20 years, so that we can make sure that once you actually look at your investment curves, it's not totally out of control, and that that you won't be able to successfully deliver that because you're trying to deliver it all in the same time or in the same 2 or 3 year period. So we're working hard on our pipeline, and hopefully I'm hoping to have something out to the market in the next 2 months that would be approved by our board. So once again, so we committed to our transparency. I know that it was mentioned before about diversity and about what do we do to attract people in the industry. So we also, SEQ Water specifically, we are in the major project group, we are very focused and committed to diversity. And in the senior leadership team for major project group, we've achieved that. We've achieved a very good balance in terms of diversity, something that we are very proud of, and we replicated that into the rest of the team as well. So that is really important for me. So I really would like to encourage the rest of the industry to try and follow that. We spoke about training. What do we actually equip our people that we put in the situations to understand what is the requirement? And I think there was a comment earlier about contracts, people not understanding contracts, and you send your junior engineer out to facilitate contracts. We need to absolutely train our people, and as part of that, SEQ Water has made a commitment. So we are in the process of developing a SEQ Water Major Projects Academy, where we will train the people responsible for delivery in all aspects of project life cycle. We're starting with investment planning. If we set the projects up correctly in our investment planning stages, that is, our strategic assessment, our options analysis, and our detailed business cases, if we set that up right, we go into our pre-construction phase, which it will adequately address the risk. It will, give us the opportunity to then deliver successfully. So those are the things. Risk, I can just echo risk, and it is something that is not new. It's been in the making for a long time. But once again, it goes back to that culture, the culture of having the risk manager and the claims manager in place, because we know that there are inappropriate risk placed on parties that have absolutely no ability to manage that risk. So what is the result of that? It's either prices that are unachievable, or that become so expensive, or the contract fails. So yes, risk allocation, and we would like to really work with the industry. And I think in a number of the chats that has been happening on the side, there's also been discussions around that. It's about market sounding. So we are, we would like to, going forward, engage more through market sounding, you know, in all aspects of the project life cycle, so that we understand, you know, from a constructor perspective, from a designer's perspective, what are the best ways of approaching this? How, you know, how do we set ourselves up for success? So that's really, so we would like to engage more with the industry, not just with construction industry, but in the full supply chain. So in terms of technology, yes, I do understand that, you know, technology, we need to embrace technology. We need to make sure that we fully utilize the technology available, but I also understand and I also recognize the challenges around that, you know, in terms of research and development, in terms of what are the risks associated. If you cannot quantify your risk adequately, you know, you ask for innovation in your contracts, but yes, you don't really reward that through your selection criteria. So those are all the things that we are looking at improving. So we would, you know, from SEQ Water, we are definitely investing new technology for operations and both assets and also for future assets. So we would like to embrace that, also recognizing, you know, that there are some challenges around it. We would like to go forward with that. So then we go to true value for money. So it's right. Previous speaker said, you know, it's like the lowest price is not the value. And I really like what Krishan said about, you know, rather assessing contracts on value, you know, not really the monetary value, but what is it that you're bringing? And once again, you know, awarding the innovation that comes from the experts and the deliverers, you know, so we would like to do that. So in that space, we would like to value the skill sets that constructors, designers, and the rest of the supply chain bring to us. So we would like to recognize and honor that in our contracts. So they, something that I know is quite topical at the moment. It's about cash flow. You know, it's about what is the impact of all of a sudden COVID-19 on cash flows in the supply chain. So one of our commitments in our roadmap is that we are committed going forward to ensure that we pay on, you know, that we pay suppliers on time, you know, and as it becomes due, we will pay that. We will honor that, because we understand the impact that you know, cash flow have on the sustainability of other businesses. So, and then absolutely the one underpinning one is safety. You know, SEQ Water is very, very focused on safety, but not just safety for our own people and how we do business, but we would like to become very focused on this safety of our suppliers and the communities that we operate in. So that is our commitment. So I think I'd just like to finish off by saying, you know, that we are committed to being easy to do business with, you know, so take away some of the barriers, and we open for discussion. So, you know, we are committed to upholding our values, performing a role of the construction industry that we have to play with integrity. So that is, we you know, our pledge to you. And also we commit to respecting and care for our suppliers and stakeholders. So, you know, that is one of the underlying principles that we would like to build on, and that we would like to have. We hope that we have the courage to stand apart from the status quo. You know, that we assist in construction 4.1 by listening to our suppliers, looking at the contract models that we do, you know, looking at how we proportion risk, look how we award and reward innovation. So that is where we're going. So that's sort of all from me. Thanks, Jonathan.
Thanks, Barbara. You've taken Shane's lead there and using my full name. Yeah. All good. Yeah, look, thanks for speaking there and taking the last slot. I know it's hard to appear at the end there, but some very good points that you've raised there. look, we've had some very good conversations, and I knew you'd all struggle to keep to allotted time, but we've got some great conversations happening through chat, and some questions that I'd like to put to you all. In particular, one that Barbara you raised there, and maybe you could head off with this, is the issue of trust in industry. I think that we all agree that there is a problem within industry in that area, and also it's probably touches on the issue of industry culture. But how, just briefly, if you can, how do you think we can address that issue of trust?
And I'll say, Jonathan, I'm sure your wife calls you Jonathan as well as she's cross with you. But John, I think, you know, part of it is, it is something that each and every one of us will need to commit to. We all need to work on it collaboratively, because it's no good. I tell you this morning that we really would like to have good trust in the industry. You know, it doesn't matter which part of the supply chain you are, but it is something that it needs to be a collective effort. If it's not a collective effort, we're going to go back to running to the lawyers, making them richer than what they are, you know, and getting clauses and sub-clauses and sub-clauses into our contracts to make sure it reflects the fact that there's no trust, you know. So how do we proportion this shouldering this big initiative? I don't know. I think everybody that spoke today is responsible for that. Everybody that's on this call or on this virtual breakfast, it's everybody's responsibility to say, so how do we tackle trust? How do we restore trust in an industry that's actually developed a culture of mistrust?
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And we as QMCA and Consultant Australia have started the process with the Building Bridges initiative, which is primarily about that. It's about rebuilding trust between two particular stakeholders within our industry. Sami, I noticed you've unmuted yourself there. What are your views on how we rebuild trust?
John, I don't think trust is an input. I think trust is an output. No one, no party gets into a contract, gets into a conversation without trusting the other party. Whenever we start into a contract, we always, all the time, have the best interest in our mind. It's only when the project gets pear-shaped that these mistrusts start to happen. So I think we need to look at why the projects suffer, and trust is basically an outcome of that. So the project suffering probably comes from low bidding, probably comes from unrealistic risk allocation, probably comes from not understanding the scope and those kind of things. So I genuinely feel trust is an output as opposed to an input. And if we can solve the project problems, the trust will be rebuilt as a consequence to it. So that was what I wanted to mention.
Okay, thanks for that. And Shane, what's your views on how we rebuild trust?
Look, I think there's a couple of elements to it. And I've been reading with great interest the questions that have been posed online. Paul Rigo and someone anonymous from Arcadis, presumably not Greg Steele, have made an observation about the project management process. It starts with feasibility, scoping. Now, there's another critical part of the project management process that I think is underdone massively, and that is the post-implementation review. So the project closeout and the lessons learned. I think if projects are adequately scoped and if industry gets a chance to be involved with that scoping process preemptively, I think that's helpful. If we then sit down and honestly and candidly do debriefs, including post-implementation reviews and lessons learned, that can then inform how the next round comes to market. But the other thing I would add is, I love some old adages because they're generally true. Crawl, walk, run. Start with small success, even as a pilot project. Get the asset owners to be willing to trial some different things. There's been a number of comments fed through the online process around the NEC contracts in the UK. We can learn from others. It doesn't have to be invented in this backyard. We are where we are, but let's look globally and see what works globally, and then be willing to pilot and trial some things here. There's a lot of lessons learned internationally that we can bring to this market to potentially accelerate how we get, to a much more collaborative and genuine, fair contracting industry.
Yep. No, I agree with that as well. Krishan, what are your views?
I actually echo Sammy's comments on that it is an output. The contracts are instruments to protect each party's rights when things go bad. And if we are depending on contracts to manage the projects, there is something fundamentally wrong. So I would probably start with getting the right people, making sure we plan the projects well. We have taken time to look at the procurement, engage with the contractors, do the risk allocation properly, select the right contractor with the right price, and then basically back it up with a post-award engagement in a collaborative way, and the output of that will be the trust. And that's how I see it, especially on the NPR project. The trust factor was very, very high. The transparency was there. Yes, there were issues on the project, as any large project would be, but we were able to share those and have a robust discussions around those issues. And the trust factor and the transparency factor overcame those challenges.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point around the contracts are written to in case of what goes wrong. And I think the International Association of Contract and Commercial Managers do an annual survey, and they find that the top 5 negotiated terms are contract terms are not the contract terms that deal with how we make things a success. They're all about how we deal with things when things go wrong. So I think that's a very good point. But while I've got you, another one of the questions is that we've got here is we pretty much, I think there's a lot of agreement around how the procurement process is broken. What is a better procurement process? How do we fix the procurement process? You might think that, I guess from a BAC point of view, that your process is not broken, but what areas do you think that we should be focusing on from a procurement process?
Look, I would probably say is that on the large projects, and we have done some large projects, and I've heard from various industry partners and our partners in the project as well. To me, one is we need to make sure that you know exactly what you want. Before you start the procurement, you know exactly, and you need to be an informed client. You need to understand the risk. Second part is that when you are procuring it, you need to make sure that you have sufficient time and you have sufficient time to engage. And some of the suggestions which has come from the panel that you're working on is around how do you actually, during the procurement process, how do you engage with the partners or the tenderers on allocation of the risk, allocation of the methodology? And that's what we tested. We ran the expression of interest process first, try to get some information from that, put into the contract. Then we went to the proper tender process, RFT process, and we did the same thing exercise again and changed the contract, made sure that the contractor understands the contract requirements very, very clearly during the tender process so that they can price the job clearly. Not only that, what we did was when we found that some of the pricing or some of the information, some of the methodology is not correct, we did give the chance to the contractors to address that as well, to make sure that when they go out on the job, they fully understand the job, what we want from them. So to me, that's the key. That other part was the incentives around it, making sure that when we're looking at the contract after that, they are rewarded for the good performance as well. They're all part of the procurement. And I think we find that time taken during the procurement was a golden thing for its success.
Thanks, Krishan. I think I agree with you there in terms of time. Barbara, are you able to provide your thoughts on that?
John, I actually wanted to acknowledge what Krishan said about about contracts there where it goes wrong. I think far too often we sort of try to manage a contract with the contract in the hand. the contract needs to be in the drawer. You know, you need to manage the contract based on collaboration and you know, understanding what you know, and mutual agreement on the site. If you start walking around with a contract in your hand, you're absolutely doomed for failure. So that's what I wanted to say. You know.
Okay, thank you. I think there's some really good points there, and there's also some very good points that have been raised in the chat room. We're probably well over time here, so I just wanted to read some of them out because I think there's some really good points here. And I just wanted to point out that Annabel had to disappear, which is why I haven't, if you think I'm ignoring Annabel, she had to duck off. But there's a good one at the end here. Lawyers add cost, not value. The ultimate form of business development is selling a legal product during the procurement phase, which intentionally creates an imbalance in the distribution of projects' risk profile. Unfortunately, many governments lack the autonomy, experience, competency, and capacity to tell the difference. So there's an interesting viewpoint there. Excuse me. Communication is the key to trust. We all need to start talking to one another again. I think that's a great one. There's a lot of talk in here about NEC 4 as well. But I'm going to wrap things up now because we've got a bit of news to get through. There's a few people still hanging on in there, maybe waiting to hear the news, and we're well over time. But I'd really like to thank all of the speakers today. It's been an excellent conversation. We have recorded this, so if you wanted to go back and listen to it again, we'll be posting a link up on our LinkedIn site and on the website probably later on this afternoon. But yeah, thanks everyone for your time and your valuable contribution. So what I'm now going to do is I'm going to go back into the presentation again and go through a wee bit of QMCA news, which obviously once again is pretty heavily focused on COVID-19. Last time round, I talked about the possibility of the government setting up a recovery agency. Well, the government has set up a whole process around this involving different industries in the economy, of which the construction industry obviously is a big part of that. And we used to have, or had, the Infrastructure Industry Steering Committee, which was set up over a year ago, largely to try to look at initiatives along the lines of the 10-point plan from New South Wales. And it was starting to make some good progress. It was decided that that would be a good vehicle to repurpose for the point of view of economic recovery. And so the composition of that group has been expanded. There's representatives on there from client organisations like BAC and more representatives from across industry. That group has met for a couple of times now, and I can't say too much about what has been going on there because a lot of the conversations have been in confidence, but there has been a lot of very positive discussions around what needs to happen to expedite infrastructure projects. What are the impediments to expediting infrastructure projects? And I hope to be able to report on that in greater detail in the coming weeks. We also mentioned last time around that we'd have very good conversations with DTMR as one of the industry's major clients. Those conversations continue to be very positive, very collaborative. They were initially focused on how do we keep projects going, how do we address these additional risks that contractors are having to take on board. All those projects have been able to be kept going, and we've agreed upon a suite of contract changes that will allow DTMR to commence negotiations with all those individual projects. And now the focus with DTMR has gone into expediting their particular pipeline of projects. And we're looking at having, hopefully having more in-depth discussions with them around that, along with our colleagues at CCF and Consult Australia. The Queensland Major Projects Pipeline report was launched virtually back in March. we are hopeful of rescheduling the postponed live event to October time. So all of those of you that bought tickets to that event will be able to attend another event, and that event will largely be focused around the economic recovery, and we'll re-update the actual pipeline document to reflect any project announcements that have happened in the intervening period. Proud to say, or pleased to say, we've had 2 projects start. So some of our members have been successful. We've got BLB Contractors have been awarded a contract for the M1 Sports Drive to Gateway Motorway upgrade, and Seymour White have been awarded a contract to upgrade the M1 between Varsity Lakes and Tugan. As 2 start, 1 finished, and we talked about that briefly in the conversations just now, and congratulations to CPB and BMD on successfully completing the 2nd parallel runway at Brisbane Airport ahead of time and under budget. Pleased to announce today a new QMCA initiative that you'll be able to find on our website. We'll be putting some communications out around this. We've partnered with Points Build to offer CPD training on a range of issues so that you can utilize any spare time that you may have to update your skills and to get some CPD training in the process. There is a small fee for that, and QMCA shares in some of that fee, so please feel free to get in there and update your skills. And if after updating your skills, there are still things that you don't know the answer to, then we have our QMCA Brains Trust. We have a lot of people that have experts that have volunteered their time for this, and are ready and waiting to answer your questions. So please don't be backwards in coming forwards and asking questions. And on that front, I am available to answer any questions that you have, if you have any right now. I'm just looking at our Zoom chat. If you do have any questions about any of that industry news that I've just put up there, then please feel free to chuck in a question now. But this morning has been a very good conversation. We went a wee bit over time. I'm hoping that that you found it useful. As I said, that we will be putting this recording online, so that if you missed any part of that, you can go back in. I'll certainly be going back in and taking some notes. There's some very good points made and some things that I hope to follow up with various parties following this. Please, if you have any questions after this about anything that's been raised, please feel free to get in touch with me. But also importantly, please get involved. I think a lot of people have mentioned earlier on that we all have a part to play in making change and making positive change and getting to construction 4.1 or even construction 4.05. You know, as Shane said, you know, it's all about incremental steps and getting to where we want to be, and every win is a win, and we need to focus on that. So very keen on anyone that wants to get involved in that, getting in touch with me. We've got a number of initiatives that we're looking at to further our efforts in that area. But as we have no questions on any of that news, I'll call it a day. I'd like to thank you all for your participation today. I think it's been, as I say, a very good conversation. And please stay safe and look forward to talking to you again soon. Thank you very much.